Mesolithic. Middle Stone Age. Some ancient ethnobotanists used to see a distinct transition period between the transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, which they called the Mesolithic. In fact, the term was coined by the scholar de Morgan. Many prehistorians do not recognize the existence of this era, but rather consider the era that follows the Paleolithic, or the age of the polished stone, to be the Neolithic and the Eneolithic. Those who do recognize the existence of this era attribute to it a new station recently discovered on the western coast of the delta in the town of Marmada Abu Ghaleb. Its macrolithic craftsmanship appears to be consistent with the Neolithic period, but the shapes of its tools are not uniform. There are no crescent-shaped tools or small knives among them, but rather very small weapons with finely chiseled edges have been found there. Now we move on to the Neolithic Age. The Neolithic Age itself is closely linked to the era that followed it, the era of the beginning of the use of metals. The Neolithic Age is not distinguished from the era of the beginning of metals by the presence of different metals in each. In fact, copper and gold were present in both, but in the first era, they were used as decorative objects to a limited extent. In the second era, they were used for various purposes to a greater extent, especially copper, which was used to make tools instead of pottery. Geologists consider the Neolithic Age to begin at the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene, the fourth period in the formation of the Earth's crust. This era is, in fact, the dawn of modern times, as during this period, the general conditions of human life gradually changed from the conditions of life experienced by human beings today. The beginning of the Neolithic period coincides with the period of glacial retreat, which continues to this day. In North Africa, the climate began to become drier and hotter than the previous era. This was evident in the desert plateaus that had begun to form since the Upper Paleolithic. The lack of rainfall and the intensity of evaporation caused a significant decrease in the water system. However, some areas of the desert remained inhabited, especially around springs and lakes formed from small streams. In other areas, the lush forests that had once lent beauty and splendor were transformed into grassland in which neither humans nor animals could survive. During this period, the Nile Valley slowly began to take its current form, and the river also began to flow in the manner it has today. During its formation, the river deposited its sediments in the valley, which covered it with water, then gradually contracted until it reached its current state. Every year, on a specific date, the Nile would flood its banks for 3 months, leaving behind the silt it brought with it from its sources, making the valley fertile. At the end of this season, the Nile's course would shrink, leaving behind a group of swamps on the edge of the desert, where its waters had left the greater part of the silt on the plain. In these swamps, papyrus, aquatic plants, especially water buffalo and crocodiles, grew, which provided shelter to dangerous animals. The rest of the plain was covered each year with lush vegetation that quickly disappeared during the 9 months of the deadly heat. The remains of these plants provided shelter for harmful animals and insects. At the mouth of the ancient river, known as the delta, layers of silt formed. Due to its low elevation, it was composed of numerous swamps crowded with papyrus, and its boundaries were not defined due to the ponds that submerged most of it. As for human habitation since the beginning of this era, it has been consistent with the climatic changes that we will explain. All the inhabitants of the valleys of the desert and the Arabian desert migrated to the Nile Valley, near the abundant waterways that still exist. These were the remnants of tribes that had previously roamed the mountains and plateaus covered by virgin forests. In fact, the Neolithic period is the true age in which Egypt was inhabited. The villages were located on the gentle elevations on the edge of the valley. The fertile part of the valley at that time was lower and wider than it is now, having been covered by silt for approximately 12,000 years. There is no doubt that these villages are now covered by thick layers of silt, which continue to increase from century to century. They could be found, were it not for the rising water levels in the ground layers, which we now observe, preventing us from reaching them. They are found deep in the foothills or artificial elevations in all the Egyptian cities that appeared at the dawn of history. They are usually located far from the Nile and close to the desert, and foundations dating back to the Neolithic period appear to us. Fortunately, some Neolithic villages have been found in the desert that the Nile silt missed. Of particular note is the village of Al-Omari, which is close to Cairo. It was named after Professor Al-Omari, who recently discovered it and died in the prime of his youth. The same applies to the village of Marmada Bani Salama, located in the desert. On the western edge of the delta, there are Dima, Qam Ashim, Khazar al-Saga, and the last four sites in Deir Tassa, Fayum Governorate. In Upper Egypt, a new city was discovered in the towns of Tuk, Katara, and Jebelain. The most important of these lands from an archaeological perspective are the Neolithic cemeteries. These are well preserved and located on the edges of the desert on both sides of the Nile, naturally far from flooding. Furthermore, neglected industrial remains found on the desert surface near villages and cemeteries indicate the places where humans still made Darren. The Neolithic era is characterized as an era of industrial renaissance, a result of the shift in humankind's lifestyle from hunting to herding and cultivating the land. Consequently, a true renaissance in Darren craftsmanship took place. The macrolithic forms of the Jeffic period succeeded the large Darren weapons. We should note here the spearheads and blades, beautifully crafted on both sides, as well as the arrowheads crafted with grace and precision. The tool that most characterizes this era, so much so that its name sometimes comes to be applied to this era, is the polished axe. It is a piece of wood in the shape of an oblong kidney, curved at one end to become a cutter. A handle was attached to it, which is why it was used as an axe or axe. In addition to the bone was also used to make hooks, tools such as chisels, engraving tools, and needles for working leather. Other industries of this era included weaving, matting, and pottery, a type of which had never been found before this period. Surprisingly, it spread rapidly during this era, and its use became widespread. In Lower Egypt, the oldest pottery made by humans without the use of any machine was found in the Beni Salama ashtray. The first type to appear was coarsely crafted and devoid of any decoration, except in rare instances. A finger-engraved band was seen on the rim or handle of the vessel. Alongside this pottery, another finely crafted type appeared, sometimes red and sometimes black in color. It was carefully polished before firing. The shapes of this pottery were numerous, including all kinds of plates, cups, jars, and jugs. It is noteworthy that some of these vessels had protruding buttons or holes in their sides, allowing a string to be hung from them. In Upper Egypt, only in the town of Deir Tassa did a type of black pottery appear. It was not fired thoroughly. However, it was distinguished as the first type of pottery to display a true painted decoration. These designs were geometric in shape and were made with machines. Their cavities were filled with a white substance. As an inlay, these types were found in a flat and flattened lily-shaped vessel. During this era, humans began to live as shepherds and farmers, and began to inhabit villages after having been nomadic from place to place. This was due to the changing climate in North Africa. This successive drought in these regions, due to the lack of rainfall, gradually led to the disappearance of plants and trees that used to grow on the vast plateaus. Hunting areas also became scarce. Therefore, tribes in the regions where they lived or roamed began to realize the danger of famine due to the scarcity of game animals. They began raising less dangerous animals, such as bulls, sheep, goats, and pigs, to provide them with a supply of live meat. The tribes also began to cultivate nutritious grains, especially barley,